All right, class. Well, here we go. Going to a completely online format, which of course is going to change how we do a lot of things. Um, we're going to move back the due date for the mini annotated bib by 1 week on your schedule. Some of you were looking at your grades and you're like, why is my grade so low? A lot of you didn't get your organizational device in before the break. Just go ahead and submit that. That's probably what it is. We're going to be going to have conferences once a week um, with each one of you individually. It's brief. It won't take long at all. If you would, you just set that up through wconline.com. And when you go through wconline.com, a lot of you already have an account. If you don't, just set one up. Choose me, uh, and then you want to select online as opposed to e-tutoring. And then just when your time comes around for your conference, click on that, and then it'll pull up the webcam. So you're going to need to enable your webcam and your microphone, and we'll do it that way. Okay? So that's going to be in lieu of us actually meeting. We're going to have just that brief conference. Okay? Also, I'm going to be delivering material through D2L. If you look online right now, you'll see that there's a module that says week of 223. That's this week. So that's where you're going to get lectures and information. So, all right. So for today, we're going to be talking about the drafting process. So when we're talking about drafting, essentially we're talking about getting getting your shit down on paper. That's really what drafting is it's getting that initial bit of information down. Um, when we're talking about drafting, you want to make sure that you have enough time to actually draft and draft well. Um, a lot of times people will try to come in and draft for 10, 15 minutes, and that's just not enough concentrated time to work. So make sure you have enough time to do that. Um, Now, that it depends, of course, on how big your paper is. Some people, for example, if you're working on a one-page or two-page paper, you might only need 15, 20 minutes to draft. But if you're working on 5, 6, 7 pages, you need to set aside an hour or two. There's a lot of different ways to start the drafting process. Some of you like to work from outlines, so if you have an outline, focus on, okay, this is what I've said is this part of my paper in my outline. Now I'm just going to write a paragraph underneath it. That's a really good way if that's your style. Some of you might might be focused on trying to write the beginning of your paper, when really what you have in your head already is the middle. If you got the middle in your head, write the middle. That's okay. Really doesn't matter where you start, it matters where you end. And the draft is a draft, so give yourself that option. Another option is writing from the brain. Okay? In other words, just write what comes to mind. Don't worry about your organization, just get it down. We can come back and organize. Remember, a draft is not what you're turning in. This is the draft. This is what's supposed to not be perfect. Okay? Um, One of the things that a lot of people run into is writer's block. And so there's a lot of different tactics for overcoming writer's block. Number one, you can write something else. Write a poem, write a song, write something for another class. If you're stuck, the important thing isn't to plow through necessarily, it's to get unstuck. And sometimes just stepping away, it's like rebooting a computer. What's the first thing the tech guy tells you to do? Turn your computer off and back on again? That's basically what you're doing. Another option is to just write what you can. Rather than trying to write the part that you're on, write a different part. Get yourself off of the part that's hanging you up. Um, Another thing is not to write from scratch. Okay? Um, that's one of the reasons why I have you working on the Commonplace book, is that way your ideas are not starting from scratch. You can just go off of what you already have. Uh, Write a note to yourself. by writing that note to yourself, it allows you to say, okay, what I'm trying to say is da da da. Oh, hey, what I'm trying to say is this. Then that's what you need to put down. Um, Another option would be to just talk. Talk to a tutor, talk to a professor, talk to a friend. Talk to yourself. I mean, I cannot tell you how many times I have I start pacing and I start talking to myself. And that's what's gotten me unstuck. Um, Use technology. You guys are very used to communicating via text, via Facebook, via Twitter, via Instagram. Write out what you want to say there because that's a format you're accustomed to, and then take that and put it into your paper. Sometimes your problem is you actually haven't done enough research yet. And so try to perhaps go back and research some more because what's really going on is you don't have the information. You need to write what you want to write. So try that. Um, Change your situation. Uh, Change where you're at. Change the way you're writing. Change your clothes. Uh, I'm sitting here in my Bon Jovi T-shirt. It's casual, right? If I'm having a hard time writing, or if I'm having a hard time focusing, sometimes what I'll do is, even though there's nobody watching me, I'll dress up. And that just puts me in a different mind frame. Um, I'm being pretty casual with you guys, so I'm in a little bit more relaxed environment. And perhaps most important, do not expect perfection from a draft. Okay? Don't try to quote unquote get it right as soon as you put it down. The important thing is to get it down. Then we'll get it right. Okay? Um, the other thing I want to talk about is transitions. And transitions are basically the connective fiber of writing. Um, I'm not going to dive into this in great detail in our conversation. I posted two different things for transitions in this week's material. One of them is about writing transitions, and another one is a PowerPoint. So the first one's a link to writing transitions. The second one is a PowerPoint describing some transitions. So take a look at those, and that should really give you an idea of how transitions work to connect material. Because a lot of times people will write and they have chunk information. So you have these big, massive chunks of information, but your readers have no idea how they work together. Okay? So look at that material. If you have any questions, shoot me an email. Let's talk about drafting the introduction. In class, we've talked about how a thesis, you've been raised to think that the thesis, for most of you, that the thesis is the last sentence of the first paragraph. Again, nothing wrong with that, okay? But especially if we're talking about a larger work, such as the thesis you're writing, or like with me with my dissertation, the thesis might not come for a long time. So, like with my dissertation, my quote-unquote thesis didn't come for several pages because I was writing something that was 200 pages, okay? So think about that as you're putting it together. Your thesis goes in the place where it best goes based on how you're structuring your paper. And we'll talk about some different ways that might happen. So some ways to begin a thesis. Start with a quotation, okay? I started my dissertation off with two quotes that came actually before my chapter started. So I had quote, chapter one, and then I talked about the quote and the significance of the quote to the work that I was doing. Start with a story. Starting with a narrative can be a really great way of engaging your readers. Stories are pathos-laden, okay? They bring emotion. Now, we don't want to overdo the emotion, but emotion can bring a reader into your work. Now, obviously, if you're writing, 3-4 paragraphs of a story, you're not going to have your thesis in the last sentence of the first paragraph. Another good way to start sometimes is by defining, or perhaps a better way to say this would be redefining a term. Now, do not start with a dictionary definition of a term. This does not do anything useful for your audience, okay? But if you are looking at a term that has perhaps been thought of in a particular way for a long period of time, bringing a slightly different definition to how we should look at that term might be a useful way of bringing your audience is. Another way would be to provide some needed, though not necessarily obvious, background information. So look at your topic and say, okay, what do most people think they know about this? And what is the information that perhaps they actually need to know in order to understand this work? Another way of starting would be to challenge a commonly held belief about something. So it's kind of the most people think that X, but in actuality, Y. Okay, and that's a really great way of getting your audience to reconsider right off the bat commonly held beliefs. It challenges them, it engages their brain. And then, or another way would be to explain what type of commonly misunderstood information you're going to explore, what kind of conflicts or difficult material. Any one of these is a good way of opening, but a lot of them do not allow for that thesis at the end of the first paragraph. That's okay. Not only is that okay, it's good. Okay? Now, as you're thinking about developing your paragraphs, okay, these are your body paragraphs. Make sure that your information is relevant. A lot of times people will put a lot of information into a paragraph or an essay that really doesn't have a lot to do with the overall point of what they're trying to accomplish. Make sure that it's unified. Your transitions are going to help a lot with that. Make sure that all your information works together and that people understand how this paragraph relates to this paragraph. What is it doing? You should never just jump from one thing to the next. Each paragraph should move seamlessly from one to the other and be connected to what's before it. If it's not connected, then you've got to figure out a way to do it. Maybe you need to reorganize your material. Maybe you need to bring in a better transition statement. But there should be some way of making this material connect. Make sure that it's coherent. Make sure that your audience can understand what you're saying. A lot of times people will go big words, they'll overtalk, they'll try to make it overly complicated. We need to keep our information easily understood. Make sure that it's well developed. In other words, don't just skip over a piece of information, okay? Don't just hit it in a sentence and go. Get in depth so that people can understand and that it's sufficiently developed to where your point is actually made and it can't just be dismissed out of hand. And make sure that it's interesting, okay? Make sure that what you're saying actually grabs your reader's attention. Think about your different rhetorical tools, okay? Of ethos, pathos, logos. And also another one to think of is it's not part of the rhetorical triangle, but it is important. It's what we call kairos, Kairos. And kairos means timeliness. Okay, is this information that I'm giving relevant to something now? So for example, right now, okay, something on the psychological effects of isolation would have a lot of kairos to it. All right, drafting your conclusion. So some different ways. What we don't want to do is just summarize what we've already said and spit it back out. If that's all you're doing, you're not doing enough. You're not being effective with your words. We've already read everything you've said. Now tell me why it's important. Why does it matter? Why should I care about this? What should I do about it? Okay? Don't just leave it hanging and say, I have told you X, Y, and Z. Yeah, I know you told me X, Y, and Z. I just read X, Y, and Z. Now why should I care about it? So, some different ways of approaching your conclusion. Refer back to the quote or the anecdote. If you told a story, for example, if what you're talking about is Black Lives Matter, and you talked about a specific story at the beginning of police brutality, okay? Maybe what you do at the end is say, we cannot leave the victim mentioned earlier hanging. We need to do something to help him and ensure that this never happens again. So it provides a bookend to each side of what you're doing. Um, if you have a very long or technical project, then you might look at a summary of what you've done. That's about the only time I would suggest doing that. Um, talk. Another strategy might be to talk about how what has been learned from this should change people's thinking. From this, this reveals da 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 da, and as such, people need to reconsider da 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 da. Maybe this is where you talk about a solution for your problem. Um, Another thing that you can do is indicate additional research that needs to be conducted. For example, if you're talking about, how your solution would fix a problem in the Atlantic, you might say, well, this solves a problem in the Atlantic. The Pacific is its own thing, and further research needs to be done to explore that area. Talk about what the reader could do. Um, do you want your reader to call their congressman to fix this problem? Do you want them to show up and vote? What do you want your reader to actually do? Uh, and another way to end it would be with an image, not like an actual picture, but like a mental image or a quotation, or you can have a story at the end, okay, and use that as your conclusion. So a lot of different ways you can hit the conclusion that aren't just simple, I have told you ABC. Now, when we draft, we have to draft responsibly. Okay, that is very important. So, have you genuinely answered your research question? When you were doing this, did you actually answer it, or are you just throwing off a quick, off the cuff solution that isn't really well thought through? Have you acknowledged any counter evidence to your draft? In other words, are there people that would argue against this that you haven't really addressed the issues? And not only is that important for drafting responsibly, but it's also important for your ethos, because if you don't acknowledge the other side and the strengths of the other side's argument, they're going to tear you apart. So you have to acknowledge that. Have you documented your sources? So if you're bringing evidence to the table, you have got to have in-text citation, and you have to have a works cited page that acknowledges that. Whether that's a full quote, whether that's a paraphrase, whether that's a summary, you need to cite, and that citation only makes your argument stronger. And have you avoided misrepresenting your sources? Um, it's easy to take a quote out of context, to remove it from the larger context of what is going on. And that's so dangerous. That is so, so dangerous. Make sure that when you are quoting a source, you are not just using the words that they say, but you are also making sure that those words mean what they were intended to mean. All right, that's what we're covering for this week. Please make sure that you keep up with your discussion boards. That doesn't change. If you don't have your organization device in, let's go ahead and get that in. And if you have any questions, please email me, and go ahead and set your appointment through WC Online. So that's www.langston.mywconline.com. Again, www.langston.mywconline.com. Thanks, guys. Love you. Have a good day.